안녕하세요. 반갑습니다. 저희가 와일리 블레빈스 박사님을 모시고 사이언스 오브 리딩 이 내용에 대해서 자세히 좀 여쭤보고 들어보는 시간을 마련하도록 하겠습니다. 실제로 이 사이언스 오브 리딩을 하고 나서 아이들의 리딩에 대한 부분들이 많이 올라왔다고 하는데요. 이 방법이 어떻게 쓰여지고 또 어떤 방식으로 아이들에게 지도를 하고 있는지 좀 들어보도록 하겠습니다.
So the science of reading is just this big body of knowledge about how children learn to read. For a long time, most of the knowledge that we use to teach children to read came from us, educational researchers and classroom teachers. But there have been these other scientists in other parts of universities, like cognitive psychologists who do brain research and linguists who study language. And they've been asking the same questions. How do we best teach children to read? Now the different groups are coming together and sharing that body of information. So some of what cognitive psychologists and linguists have learned is really helping us better understand how children learn to read. But there are other things that they have found out that have alerted us to the fact that there are some things we're doing in the classroom that aren't as impactful as they need to be. Because now we can look inside the brain and see what's happening. We know more about language. And that information we're trying to get into the classrooms by training our teachers in what is called the science of reading. It's a huge movement in the United States. There are many states that have passed laws, passed legislation that require that schools use materials that are designed with this new body of information in place. So no longer can we say, well, I think this is the best, or I feel this is the best. We are using solid data that we have collected in classrooms and in lab sites around the country about how children really learn to read. So I work in the schools in New York City, the public schools. It's the largest school system in our country, and they are transitioning to the science of reading. The particular school that I started in, that we set up as a lab site to study this transition, only about 9% of the students were reading on grade level because of the way they had been taught for the past 20 years. So we've started implementing these new refined practices. And when we took our mid-year data this year, we've only been into this transition a year and a half. Over 71% of our students were on or above grade level expectations. This kind of structured literacy teaching really has a significant impact. It is systematic. It is explicit. There's attention to phonics and how we do it better than we've ever done before, while simultaneously working on how we develop language. Students' language comprehension skills, which entails their vocabulary and their knowledge about topics. So these things, two things have to work together to build the strongest foundation in reading possible. So it's changing children's lives in the United States, this new focus about how we get them started on their literacy journey.
우리 아이들에게 사이언스 오브 리딩이 진짜 좋다고 느껴지는데, 그러니까 단어 철자를 읽고 그리고 단어를 읽고 문장을 읽어내려가는 그 과정에 대한 이해를 조금 더 쉽게 설명을 해주시면 좋을 것 같다.
So we start in the United States by developing students' oral language, their vocabulary, so they have a store of words that they can use in our instruction. Because the basic idea behind reading at the beginning is that we are looking at print, we're looking at letters, we're looking at words, and we're changing those printed letters into words that we know. So we're sounding out the words. We're looking at the letters, saying the sounds, putting them together to read the words, and connecting it to a word that we have heard before. So we're spending a lot of time teaching those letter sound connections while also building students' vocabulary so that when they work through the word, they can attach it to meaning. And that's part of the process. And then we start building very simple sentences. And we start teaching them how English sentences are structured. So there's a who part, like the dog, and there's a did what part, like ran, and there could be a where part, like to the park. And they learn that the dog ran to the park, how to form English sentences with simple words that they're learning how to sound out or read. We are no longer focusing on memorizing lots of words by themselves, because now brain researchers have shown us in order to learn a word, there are different parts of our brains that we use. There's the part where the sounds are stored, the part where the letters are stored, and a part where the meaning is stored. So if we are just teaching words as big units, we're just focusing on what it looks like and the meaning, but we aren't looking at the individual letters. So it's very difficult for students to remember it quickly and easily. But once we start looking at the individual pieces of words, the individual letters, they always have a tool to attack words. New words, words that are in their speaking vocabulary, and so on. So it's a much more reliable tool to develop reading skills. So what we're finding is that when we do more intensive work with that early on, it speeds up students' reading abilities. They're able to access text. It's easier for them, so they want to read more. And when they're reading more, they're getting better at reading, they're learning new vocabulary, and so on. So it just starts building on itself. And that's what's really exciting. There were a lot of schools in the United States who were just using level books, and they were memorizing lots of words, but those words weren't sticking. Now they're switching to books where they can sound out the words. So the first time they see that word, they have a tool to figure out how to say it. And that's a really powerful tool and a big change for the learning of our students.
한국 부모님들은 파닉스를 그냥 파닉스 책을 한 권을 풀면 파닉스를 뗐다라고 하거나 아니면 파닉스는 규칙이니 어린 아이들이 익히기 힘들다. 그래서 파닉스는 발음 기호와 같은 거라서 파닉스를 가르치면 안 된다. 아직도 1980년대 홀랭귀지에 따라서 이렇게 부모가 읽어주고 아이가 따라 읽는다. 이런 개념으로 파닉스 무용론을 하는 부분들이 상당히 한국에서 많기 때문에 사이언스 오브 리딩을 이해하기 위해서는 파닉스 교육의 기반을 가지고 해야 되는데 파닉스 자체를 안 가르치려고 하니까 이게 지금 사이언스 오브 리딩이 이해하기가 힘들거든요.
So one of the reasons why phonics has increased in its importance in the science of reading movement is the fact that the basic phonics skills that we teach our young readers enables them to have access to sounding out about 87% of the words in the English language. It is a highly reliable tool. Why would we have children just guess at words when they have a tool where they can actually work through the words? We also know from brain researchers what we have to do in order to store words in our memory. So if we are just looking at a word as a big chunk, it is the part of our brain that's being used isn't the part of the brain where words are permanently stored. So they kind of go in, we use it, and then they leave. And so students need lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of repetition. But if we teach phonics how to sound it out, it's very quick. We have the tools. And if we don't remember it after seeing it once or twice, we have a tool to figure it out the next time we see it. Whereas if we've memorized it or tried to memorize it and we don't remember it the next time, we have no tool. So phonics gives you a reliable tool to attack words. And it is a tool that once you learn it, you will always have that tool. You don't have to rely on memorizing tons and tons of words. Now you have access to tons and tons of words. It's like building a house. You have your hammer, your nails, your wood, and what have you, where before you just had wood. And so it was much, much harder.
홀랭귀지로 아이들을 리딩을 하기 때문에 아이들이 리딩에 도달하지 못하고 그냥 영어를 배우는 과정에서 포기를 하는 경우가 상당히 많아요. 그래서 이럴 때 파닉스를 익히는 게 이 아이가 영어를 어휘를 익히고 그리고 또 이제 어휘력을 키우는 과정하고 어떻게 조금 더 상관관계가 있는지 디테일하게 좀 말씀을 해주시면 좋을 것 같아서.
So one of the reasons why focusing on phonics is so important, in the past when we just had those level books, the early levels, there was a lot of repetition in the vocabulary. So students saw them many, many times, and over time they were picking up some of those words. However, once the pattern starts to leave and there aren't as many repetitions in certain words, children would have difficulties accessing those words. And for our students in the United States, if they didn't have a tool to figure out the words like phonics and sound it out, they would give up. It was too hard and the stories became too difficult. And so that's why we want to focus on giving them tools where they can read those words and become really efficient using those tools. Because what's happening in our schools in New York City that's so exciting is once children understand how the code works, how the system works, and they're able to access these words so easily, they want to read more and more and more. And as they're reading more, it motivates them to read. They'll want to pick up additional books. And when they're picking up additional books, they're learning new words and learning new vocabulary. It's really growing at a rapid pace. They don't get discouraged because they already have that foundation and they already have those tools to read. So the books that get progressively harder, they're spending all of their time just learning new ideas, learning new vocabulary, these more interesting, richer reads that can make them laugh or cry or what have you. It just builds on itself.
그러니까 단어를 외우지 말고 읽으면 아이가 그 단어를 읽으면서 머릿속으로 그 단어의 뜻이 연상이 되고 그리고 연상이 되면서 자기가 단어를 봤을 때 그걸 내 걸로 만들 수 있는데 그걸 조금 더 쉽게 설명해 주실 방법이 있으실까요?
So we now know how we store words into our memory to automatically retrieve them or access them when we're reading. And there are three parts of our brain that need to be used. So when we're learning a new word, we're looking at the letters, saying and hearing the sounds, putting the sounds together to read the word, and attaching it to meaning. So there's the part where the sounds are stored, the letters are stored, and the meaning is stored. And so that creates this really tight connection. So the word is already always there for us to access. When we learn words as whole units, only the meaning and the sounds are being used. And so it's a very loose connection mentally. And so it's much harder to access them. It's much harder to remember them. It's much harder to distinguish one word from another because you haven't fully analyzed or looked at that word. And phonics gets us to fully analyze those words. I know for a long time, people were just memorizing lots of words. There's a limit to what we can do in English because the English language is so large and so robust in terms of vocabulary. If we just kind of limit ourselves to the words that we can remember, it's really going to be hard to become a really skilled, proficient reader in more complex English text. So you're really giving yourself a plateau or a ceiling in terms of your reading growth. And we don't want that to happen. It's one of the reasons why we're talking so much in the science of reading about what these other scientists, like the brain researchers and the linguists and what have you, have taught us. Whole language has really failed our children in the United States. There are large numbers of kids who can't read very well because they spent so much time early on memorizing lots of words. And it was okay when they had pattern texts that were super easy, but then when the pattern was taken away, it was hard for them to access those words. But they had spent so much time doing this, they had developed bad habits. And so it's really hard when a child is struggling to read to then teach them phonics to access the words because they have another way of accessing text. They'll think about the general ideas and try to guess at words, and it just doesn't work. It's just not effective. When we flip the switch and start with the letters and sounds and putting them together, then it takes off. And so that is a major shift for so many people. It's different from how many people learn to read. It's different from how many teachers were taught how to teach. But now we have the information, the facts, the data that has shown us this is a better, more efficient. And now that we're putting this into the schools in the United States, we're seeing faster progress. We're seeing more significant gains in our students than ever before. Our kindergartners are first year of school in the United States, and our kindergarten teachers are saying things like, I never knew my students could do this so quickly in the first year of school. It's because they now understand how words work. They now get the system, and they're running with the system in a really powerful way.
전 세계의 영어 교육 시장이 137조래요. 그리고 그 중에 한국의 영어 시장이 10에서 15조, 10% 정도를 차지하고 있는데 영어 교육 시장이 정말 큰 이유 중에 하나가 초등학교, 중학교, 고등학교에 공부한 걸 대학 가서 다시 시험을 위한 공부를 하고 사회에 나와서 또 회화를 하려고 또 영어 공부를 하는 어렸을 때 한 게 이어지지 못하고 계속 시험을 위한 영어 공부를 하다가 사회에서는 결국 문법 위주 그리고 독해 위주의 영어 공부가 실생활에서 이용되지 않고 있는 거거든요. 이걸 박사님이 보셨을 때 뭐 좀 조언을 해주실 거라든지.
So in the science of reading, there's a huge focus, as I said earlier, on phonics, but that's not it. There's also a huge focus on building oral language and building vocabulary. And so when we look at our phonics lessons aren't these isolated kinds of lessons where they're just looking at print and reading words. When we are in our phonics lessons, we are spending a lot of time having our students use that language to talk about the stories they read. If we ask a question about a story, we don't call on a volunteer and have them answer and then move on. We have children talk about the stories with their partners. So throughout the lesson, we look at how many opportunities children have to use language. And that has to be increased significantly. They can't be sitting and taking it in. They have to be using, whether they're reading a book, picking up a pencil and writing, or talking. So increasing talk is a really big deal in a phonics lesson. There's so many times when we can do that. For introducing a new word, just having the children say it, having them repeat the definition, look in a book, find the sentence that has the story, read it, then talk about what that means with your partner. We're building in all of these systems so that students are using language. The children that I work with in New York City, most of them speak a language other than English at home. So we have to talk the entire lesson. That is different from the way phonics has been taught there before. And so by being really conscious about how you change your lessons so that, yes, you're learning phonics, but you're also contextualizing all those words and learning their meaning. So it's vocabulary. You're also giving them opportunities to use it. So it's the production of the language. Then they're picking up the pencil. So after they've talked about the story, they're picking up their pencil and writing what they talked about. So they're connecting that to print. All of that has to be a part of how the lesson goes. And those other parts weren't there for a really long time. Once we do that, we can speed up students' growth. And it sticks. If you're using the language all the time, it's much easier to use it as you grow up, as you get older, and you go through the grades. We don't want children to go through our schools and only have the ability to read words, or maybe to write some words. We want them to be able to use language in a very fluent, sophisticated way, because they're going to need that in their communities in which they live, or in the jobs that they might take, or the universities they study at, or what have you.